Hello, I'm glad you joined us today as we continue to study the Gospel of Mark. Last time we looked at the burial of Jesus. Today we look at the resurrection of Jesus as recorded in Mark chapter 16. In Mark 16 and verse 1 it says, "When the Sabbath was over, Mary Magdalene and Mary the mother of James and Salome bought spices that they might come and anoint him. And very early on the first day of the week they came to the tomb when the sun had risen. And they were saying to one another, 'Who will roll away the stone for us from the entrance of the tomb?' And looking up, they saw the stone had been rolled away, and although it was an extremely large stone. And entering the tomb, they saw a young man sitting at the right, wearing a white robe, and they were amazed. And he said to them, 'Do not be amazed. You're looking for Jesus the Nazarene, who has been crucified. He is risen. He is not here. Behold, here's the place where they laid him. But go and tell his disciples and Peter, he is going before you to Galilee. There you will see him, just as he said to you.' And they went out and fled from the tomb, for trembling and astonishment had gripped them. And they said nothing to anyone, for they were afraid. Now after he had risen early on the first day of the week, he first appeared to Mary Magdalene, from whom he had cast out 7 demons. She went and reported to those who had been with him while they were mourning and weeping. And when they heard that he was alive and had been seen by her, they refused to believe it. And after that he appeared in a different form to 2 of them while they were walking on their way to the country. And they went away and reported it to the others, but they did not believe them either." Mark's account is similar to Matthew's. Matthew gives a few more details. All the gospel accounts, of course, give a little different details to give us a fuller picture. Matthew tells us of the arrival of these women just after an earthquake had taken place because of the dramatic descent of the angel. And he tells also the terror that was experienced by the guards. And of course, by that time they had left. Matthew tells of the appearance of the risen Christ to the women. We read of his appearance also to Mary Magdalene. The names of these women, 2 of them are given by Matthew and 3 by Mark. Luke also adds Joanna to this list. So several women had gone. The record shows that they are more in tune with the things of Jesus than his 11 apostles who are left. They're weeping and mourning. They're still in hiding. Chapter 16 verse 1 says, "When the Sabbath had passed, Mary Magdalene, Mary the mother of James, and Salome bought spices that they might come and anoint him." The Sabbath had ended on, according to Jewish time, the evening before, Saturday at 6 p.m. The markets would have opened again. They would have bought spices, and then these women get up first thing the next morning to go to anoint the body of Jesus. Any further delay would have been the decay of Jesus' body they had in mind, and they needed to anoint his body. Now it's true that Joseph of Arimathea and Nicodemus had already wrapped the body and in that put a mixture of myrrh and aloes, but they had bought these spices to go and to anoint the body of Jesus, which was their custom. And they leave early in the morning. John says why it was still dark. Evidently it was dark when they left, and by the time they get there the sun was rising. And they come there on the first day of the week, and they're talking to one another as to how might they get someone to roll the stone away, because it's a very large stone and it'd be hard for these women to remove the stone. But as they approach, they see that the stone, even though it was very large in size, already rolled away, and that was alarming to them. They had seen exactly where Jesus was. They had been there at Calvary, and they had seen Joseph place him in this new tomb. And as they approach, they see inside, and they see on the right a young man, or the appearance of a young man. We know from Matthew's account that this is the angel clothed in white, and it says that they were amazed. It's interesting the words that are used here. The words when it talks about the amazement that had gripped them, and it's very strong words. And we can only imagine as all of this strikes them with amazement. Not only the fact that Jesus his body's not there, they see for themselves. And he said, "You're seeking Jesus of Nazareth." He knows why they've come, and he says he's not here, he is risen. See, here's where they laid his body. And they would have seen the things that later John and Peter would have come in and seen, the grave clothes laying there, and the face cloth rolled up in a place by itself. They would have seen this. Things that show that this wasn't a struggle. This was, if there was a struggle and the body had been stolen or something like that, the grave clothes wouldn't have been taken off, and neither would there have been time to take a face cloth and to roll it up and place it aside. They see all these things. How much sinks in at this time, we're just not told, but they're just seized with amazement. This angel tells them to go and to tell the disciples and Peter that Jesus will go before them into Galilee, and that they'll see him there just as he had told them before. It's interesting that he doesn't rebuke them. He doesn't rebuke the disciples. Even they had not been looking for his resurrected body. They'd come to look for the dead body to anoint it. But Jesus said he's going to be raised on the third day, and he was raised. His body's not there. But the angel doesn't rebuke them. And he doesn't give a rebuke even to the disciples at this point. And I think he especially points out to tell the apostles and Peter. Peter must have been especially distraught. They were weeping and mourning, and I'm sure Peter was especially distraught because of his denial and all the things that had happened. And it was told, go tell the disciples and Peter. All things had been forgiven. They were still coming to understand, and he would still yet open their minds to the scriptures, as we'll can read in the account of Luke chapter 24. Then they would understand, and then they could go forward, and they would do so with great courage. But all these things are still taking place, and these women are told to go, and yet they're just gripped with astonishment. They are alarmed, and they go, and because of that, they don't tell anything at first, but they're afraid. But we're told that Jesus appeared to Mary Magdalene, and we get a fuller account of that in the other Gospels. But he speaks to her, and at first she doesn't recognize him according to the other Gospels, but then she does realize him as the Master. And she obeys and goes, and she tells the disciples that he is risen, that he's alive, that she's seen him alive. And yet they're so distraught and so slow to believe that they won't believe her. He tells us that Jesus appeared to two others. We read in other accounts that these were the two who were on the road to Emmaus. Here it just says they were on their way to the country. You remember they finally sat down with him and broke bread, and when he broke bread and blessed it, they recognized that this was Jesus, and then he disappeared from their presence. And then they said to one another, were our hearts not burning within us, when he was talking about opening their minds to the scriptures? And they go and tell the disciples that Jesus is risen, and they won't believe them either. But Jesus was raised from the dead, and he was raised on the third day, just like he'd predicted. He'd said long ago, when he cleansed the temple, destroy this temple, and in 3 days I'll raise it up, speaking of the temple of his body. And he was raised by the power of God. And it proves him to be who he said he was. All the things that he had done, the things that he had taught, the miracles that he had wrought, all these things pointed to the fact that he was the Christ, the Son of God. The ultimate miracle that he performed there in raising Lazarus from the dead in John chapter 11 surely showed that he was the Son of God and had power over death. that he was the resurrection and the life, that we could live if we believe in him, even if we die. But his resurrection himself, out of all the promises and things that he had done, he would have been just a good man, a good teacher, if he had not been raised from the dead. But Jesus was not only crucified and buried according to the Scriptures, he was raised from the dead according to the Scriptures. His body did not undergo decay. And this would be the thing that they would preach in the first gospel sermon on the day of Pentecost, that this proved Jesus who he said he was. His body didn't undergo decay, he was raised, and they were witnesses to it. And Paul in Romans chapter 1 and verse 4 says, it's the resurrection of the dead that proves Jesus to be the Son of God with power. And it's the power to overcome death, the power to forgive sins. At this point, these disciples don't believe the testimony of those who've seen. They're going to have to see for themselves, and Jesus rebuked them to be so slow to believe. And the first time that he's with them, you remember the other Gospels tells us that Thomas wasn't with them, and he wouldn't believe till he saw. He said, I won't believe it till I see him put my hands in the holes of his hands and in his side. But when he saw, he believed, said, my Lord and my God. They would eventually believe, and as we'll see next time, after their belief and after having their minds open to the Scriptures, they would go forth with courage, with the commission to go into all the world and preach the gospel of Jesus Christ in order that we might be saved. Such a wonderful account. Everything that we believe about Jesus is based in the resurrection. If these things do not take place, then everything we believe as Christians is nothing. But these are eyewitnesses accounts incredible eyewitness accounts of those who were there, who really were not people who were just looking for Jesus to be raised. In fact, they were doubting that he would be raised. They were going to anoint a dead body. The disciples at first wouldn't believe it, even from their closest friends. But they believed it when they saw it. And they were willing to give their lives to preach the gospel that Jesus was dead, but is raised now to live eternally, and is at the right hand of God and has the power to forgive sins. People won't die for a lie, but they'll die for the truth. And these men knew what they had seen. And as Paul would tell later in 1 Corinthians 15, this wasn't done in a corner just to a few people, to these disciples. Even 500 at one time, Paul says, that Jesus appeared to over a period of 40 days. And then he ascended into heaven. A lot of things to consider. Hope that you'll join us next time for our conclusion as we look at the Great Commission given to the apostles. Now, till then, I hope you have a good day.